5 months ago, English felt like a wall I could never climb. It wasn't just another subject for me. It was a reminder of all the times I stayed silent even when I had something important to say. I had studied English in school for years, memorized rules, passed exams somehow, but real English, the kind people actually speak, was always out of reach. Whenever I heard someone talk fluently, my chest tightened. I could understand bits and pieces, but forming my own sentences felt impossible. Words got stuck in my throat, and fear took control before I even tried. The problem was not that I didn't want to learn. Deep inside, I wanted it badly. I knew English was the key to many doors: better jobs, confidence, respect, and the ability to connect with the world beyond my comfort zone. But wanting something and taking action are two very different things. For years, I told myself excuses. I'm not good at languages. I started too late. People will laugh if I speak wrong. These excuses became my shield, keeping me safe from embarrassment, but also trapping me in the same place. Everything changed after one painful experience. I was given a chance, an opportunity that could have improved my future, but it required speaking English. When the moment came, my mind went blank. I knew exactly what I wanted to say, but not in English. The conversation slipped through my fingers, and I could see disappointment on the other person's face. When it was over, I felt empty. It wasn't just about the lost opportunity. It was about realizing how many times English had silently held me back. That night, I couldn't sleep. The same scene replayed in my head again and again. I stood in front of the mirror and asked myself a tough question. How long are you going to hide? For the first time, instead of feeling helpless, I felt angry at my fear, my laziness, my excuses. That anger turned into a decision. I didn't promise myself perfection. I promised myself effort. I chose 5 months because it felt challenging but possible. I told myself, for 5 months, you will show up every single day, no matter how tired, no matter how stupid you feel. The first week was brutal. I quickly realized how weak my foundation was. Simple sentences sounded confusing, and native speakers talked too fast for my ears. I started with children's stories and beginner videos. At first, my ego fought back. A voice in my head said, "You're too old for this." But I ignored it. I reminded myself that learning has no age, only stages. I listened without understanding fully, trusting that my brain was slowly adjusting. I bought a small notebook and carried it everywhere. Every new word I heard went into that notebook. I didn't just write meanings, I tried to use the words in sentences. Sometimes the sentences were completely wrong, but I didn't care. I read them aloud again and again until they felt familiar. Speaking alone felt weird at first. I talked to myself while walking, while washing dishes, even while lying in bed. My pronunciation was bad, my grammar shaky. But for the first time, English was coming out of my mouth instead of staying trapped in my head. There were days when motivation disappeared. On those days, English felt heavy, like a burden. I compared myself to others and felt slow and stupid. One small mistake could ruin my confidence for hours. People around me didn't understand why I was trying so hard. Some smiled politely, others laughed openly when I mispronounced words. Every laugh felt like a punch. More than once, I thought about quitting and going back to my comfortable silence. But then I realized something important. Everyone who speaks English fluently today once made the same mistakes I was making. The difference was not talent, it was persistence. I learned to separate my self-worth from my performance. Making mistakes didn't mean I was a failure, it meant I was learning. Silence, on the other hand, meant zero progress. That change in mindset was the real beginning of my journey. Slowly, tiny improvements started to show. I could recognize words without translating them immediately. Some sentences made sense the first time I heard them. I began to feel less scared of English sounds. The language stopped feeling like an enemy and started feeling like a puzzle. Difficult, yes, but solvable. Each small victory, like understanding a short conversation or forming a simple sentence, gave me a quiet sense of pride. By the end of the first part of my journey, English was no longer just a dream or a fear. It had become a daily habit, woven into my routine. I was still far from fluent, still making countless mistakes, but something inside me had changed. I was no longer afraid to try. And that, more than vocabulary or grammar, was the strongest foundation I could have built. This was only the beginning, but it was the hardest step I ever took. By the time the third month arrived, the struggle felt different. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled me. English had quietly become part of my daily life, not something I needed to mentally prepare for. I noticed this change one morning when I realized I had been thinking in English without forcing it. Simple thoughts appeared in my mind naturally, what I needed to do, what I was feeling, what I wanted to say. It surprised me, because only a short time ago, even forming one sentence felt impossible. Understanding spoken English became easier too. Earlier, every conversation sounded like a fast, confusing stream of noise. Now my ears had adjusted. I still missed words, but I could catch the meaning. I stopped pausing videos every few seconds to translate. Instead, I listened from start to finish, trusting myself to understand the message, not every single word. This was a big mental shift. I realized that fluency doesn't come from total understanding. It comes from comfort with uncertainty. During this phase, I pushed myself to speak more, not just alone, but with real people. This was terrifying. Every conversation felt like a test. My heart would beat faster, my palms would sweat, and my mind would warn me of mistakes before I even opened my mouth. But I spoke anyway. Online voice chats, short comments, simple discussions, anything that gave me a chance to use English in real situations. Each time I spoke, confidence replaced a little bit of fear. I also changed how I learned. In the beginning, I focused on basic vocabulary and listening. Now I focused on expression. I wanted to sound more natural, not perfect. I paid attention to how native speakers used simple words to say complex things. I copied phrases, not grammar rules. I repeated sentences from videos until my mouth felt comfortable with them. Slowly, my speaking stopped sounding like translations from my language. It started sounding like English. There were setbacks. Some days felt like failure. I would forget words I knew well. I would mix up tenses or pronounce something terribly wrong. These moments hurt, especially when I thought I should be better by now. But I learned to accept bad days as part of progress. Language learning is not a straight line. It rises and falls. Quitting on bad days would erase the good ones, so I made a rule. No matter how bad the day is, do something small in English. Reading became more enjoyable during this stage. I moved from children's stories to short articles, then to simple novels. At first, I needed a dictionary constantly, but over time, I learned to guess meaning from context. This felt powerful. It meant my brain was learning the language the way children do, through exposure, not translation. Writing also entered my routine. I started with short paragraphs about my day, my thoughts, my fears. Writing helped organize my language and made me notice my mistakes without fear. By the fourth month, English no longer felt like a foreign guest. It felt like a familiar presence. I laughed at jokes in English videos. I understood emotions behind the words, not just the words themselves. Conversations became smoother. I still made errors, but they didn't stop communication. People understood me, and that gave me confidence. I realized that communication is not about perfection, it's about connection. The final month was about consistency and belief. I didn't suddenly become fluent, but I became fearless. I stopped asking myself, is my English good enough? And started asking, am I willing to speak? That question changed everything. I used English every day without thinking about progress. Ironically, that's when progress accelerated. I was no longer chasing fluency. I was living the language. At the end of 5 months, I looked back and felt proud, not because I spoke perfect English, but because I didn't quit. English had taught me more than a language. It taught me discipline, patience, and the power of daily effort. I learned that confidence is not something you wait for. It's something you build by acting scared and moving forward anyway. The journey didn't end there. In fact, it never really ends. But the hardest part was over. English was no longer a barrier in my life. It was a bridge, and I walked across it, step by step, one brave sentence at a time.